All right, now let's talk about Equiano and his recount of his experience with being enslaved. Remember, when we take a primary source, we want to think about it first before we dive in, right? We think about the ABCs, the audience, the bias, the context, and so let's talk a little bit about who this guy was first. Equiano was a slave. He was born in Africa, although there is some dispute, as in any many historical accounts. There are different interpretations, but generally historians believe that he was born in what's now Nigeria. He was a member of the Igbo tribe, was captured, thrown into slavery, came to America and was enslaved by a couple of different masters who both noticed something special or took a liking to him and helped teach him to read and write, and so that by the time he purchased his freedom in his 20s, he was fluent in English and wound up settling in England. Later became part of the burgeoning abolitionist movement in England, the international abolitionist movement, which was just getting going by the late 1700s, and he was a big part of it. And so this account of his, this is just one excerpt from a 2-volume account of his experience with slavery. It's essentially the first slave narrative, and this becomes much more popular in the 1800s, particularly in the 1840s and 50s. The most famous narrative being probably Frederick Douglass's autobiography of Frederick Douglass. But there are many slave narratives written by escaped slaves, people who purchased their freedom or escaped to freedom, and then writing these pamphlets, these books, to help explain to people what actually goes on in slavery. And this is really the first one that takes off as an international book that's widely read, in which he accounts what it's like to be a slave from a slave's perspective. It was widely read, and it was used as propaganda for the abolitionist movement. He was not shy about explaining where he stood on slavery and what he thought was the long-term solution. It was abolition. So this excerpt and this book really needs to be read in that context, right? So, that's part of the bias, right? He is a slave. He's anti-slavery. He's writing this in order to tell people of the horrors of slavery so that they'll do something about it, not just so that they'll be more educated, but because he wants them to do something about it. And he's writing in 1789, so this is after the American Revolution. It's right when the French Revolution is going on. So there are, the entire European world is abuzz with talk of freedom and liberté, liberty. This idea that humanity is moving forward, progressing toward a future in which slavery is long past, and so he's very much playing upon those themes as well as upon religious themes. He converts to Christianity while he's a slave, and uses it to advance his cause. Uses it to advance the abolitionist cause, and in fact, religion is the primary motivation of the vast majority of abolitionists, both in his time in the 1780s and all the way through the 1850s and 60s. And abolitionism is a religious movement, essentially, driven by Quakers, evangelicals, Christians who were appalled by slavery and the slave trade in particular, and wanted to see it end. So let's look in and think. Well, we talked about the context to who he is, what his bias might be. The audience, of course, is the public. The English public, the English-speaking public certainly, but the English public and the American public, to get them to think anew about slavery and work toward its abolition. Not going to necessarily do want to highlight a few of the things that he talks about that I think are particularly interesting. Starting here on page 62, he starts out, "My father, besides many slaves, had a numerous family of which 7 lived to grow up, including myself and a sister who was the only daughter." So that's interesting right there. Besides many slaves. My father, besides many slaves, had a numerous family. He's born into a slave-owning family. And a lot of people are taken aback when they think about that. It's like, wait a minute, wasn't he? Weren't Africans enslaved? Well, yes, Africans in America were enslaved, but Africans back in Africa enslaved each other as well. The differences, there are significant differences, though, between slavery as it was practiced internally on the African continent and slavery as it developed in North America as well as elsewhere in the Americas. For one thing, it wasn't hereditary. It wasn't as if you were born in slavery and lived an entire life as a slave. Generally, slavery was a product of war. So tribes go to war. The victorious tribe might take a few people, especially women or children, as slaves, bring them back, and then would raise them up in the new tribe. And when that person got to adulthood, generally they were considered full members of the tribe. And did not have a slave status. The children of that slave didn't become slaves as well. So it was not hereditary. It was not race-based. It was not tied to a mass market crop like sugar or tobacco or rice. And so it did not have the same kind of features. It did not have the same kind of violence as slavery in the New World did. As I was the youngest of the sons, I became, of course, the great favorite of my mother, and was always with her, and she used to take particular pains to form my mind. What he's trying to do here, right? I mean, this is an autobiography. It's a narrative. It's propaganda, right? He's trying to appeal to the reader's emotions. He's also trying to show the basic, the essential humanity of the African slave, right? This is something that we even can sympathize with or can connect to. I'm the youngest of my family. I would argue I was not the favorite of my mother, but many of the babies of the family are the favorites, right? We know that in our own experience today. He's appealing to his audience. He wants them to understand the essential personhood, the essential humanity of slaves, to understand that what you are doing with slavery, you are doing to human beings. You're not doing it to animals. You're not doing it to some class of species. These are human beings who have emotions and who have experiences similar to yours. That's why he's going to talk about his family life, right? Trained up in the arts of agriculture and war. He talks about what he does growing up. And then he talks about the kidnappers. The day he's kidnapped. He witnesses his neighbors taken off. They had many stout young people, right? And then that's what slave traders are looking for. They're going to go into a village, and they're going to take the strongest kids that they can find, the youngest people that they can find, right? They don't want to take the old folks. The old folks are never going to survive the trip to the coast, let alone seas. They're not going to get good prices for the old people anyway. So they're looking for stout, very strong, robust young people who would be most likely to survive and be most likely to fetch a good price. So he saw them get taken, and then one day when all our people were gone out to their works as usual, and only I and my dear sister were left to mind the house, 2 men and a woman got over our walls and in a moment seized us both. All right, so this is interesting that women are involved in the kidnapping, in the slave trade, and then they get bound up, get carried off. They start walking, and again, this is part of this unbelievable experience that slaves must endure just to get to the New World, right? I mean, he talks about how they walk for 6 or 7 months. I mean, if he's growing up in what's now Nigeria, to get from Nigeria, which is in Central Africa, all the way to the West Coast where the slave trading posts are, that is an extraordinary journey. Even today would be a very difficult and arduous, from which many people would not survive. So they're walking 6 or 7 months, right? He says it would be tedious. I'm not going to things for you that I saw, but I only observed that in all places where I was, the soil was exceedingly rich. The pumpkins, edas, plantains, yams, etc. were in great abundance and incredible size. So he's talking about the fertility. He wants people to understand that Africa is not this benighted wasteland, right? That Africa is a rich and fertile country. Certainly the area where he's walking through. And they have pumpkins. Itas are like the taro root, which is still a big part of the diet in that area. Pumpkins are a North American product. It's a North American plant. So even though he's in the Central Africa in the 1700s, doesn't have a whole lot of exposure to white people. Probably world goods are already, have penetrated that far into the African continent that people are growing them. Yams are an African crop that get transported the other way. So this is a two-way, right? They're what we call the Columbian exchange, the exchange of goods and people and ideas and academics. Doesn't just flow from one direction to another. It's going back and forth. I thought it was also interesting that they also grow everywhere a great deal of tobacco. Again, tobacco, which was pioneered as a cash crop in the Chesapeake. Once people see how profitable it is, they start looking to plant it in lots of different places. He also says the cotton even grew quite wild. And that's interesting because in 1789, cotton is not a very important crop in the world economy. Very few people grow it. It doesn't grow very well. It's very labor intensive. They haven't figured out how to make it more how to efficiently take the seeds out of cotton to make it more profitable. You could grow cotton, but then you would have to take the seeds out by hand. It was laborious, time-consuming, very expensive, and so before the invention of the cotton gin, which comes a few years after this book comes out, cotton was not associated with slavery at all. Interesting. We tend to think of cotton and slavery as growing up together, but that really doesn't happen until the early 1800s. So he walks on to the coast and sees the slave ship, right? And he's filled with astonishment, converted to terror. He's worried because he's never seen these kind of people, right? He's never seen white people before. The slave trade that he knows up until he gets to that coast is an African slave trade, both internally. The slave kidnappers who come and get him are black people, are African people, right? So this is a slave trade that on the front end is driven by Africans, but then he comes to the coast and he sees the white slave traders for the first time. He freaks out, right? I was now persuaded that I'd gotten into a world of bad spirits and that they were going to kill me. Of course, going on. Their complexions too differing so much from ours, their long hair, the language they spoke, which was very different from any I had ever heard, united to confirm me in this belief. Right? So he's reacting in the same way that whites react when they get to see Indians in North America, the way the Indians react, right? I mean, it would be akin to us seeing Martians or something coming. I mean, we don't know the language. They haven't seen skin like that before. Their hair is different. Everything about them is different. And he's scared. Of course he's scared. He's young. He's just 11, 12 years old. He doesn't know what's going to happen to him. And then he gets thrown into this slave ship with a multitude of black people of every description chained together, every one of their countenances expressing dejection and sorrow. Now I want to stop right here and talk, like, even for us reading today, this sounds like the work of an educated man, right? You don't use words like countenances and dejection and sorrow unless you are a very highly educated person. And this he's doing this for a couple of reasons, and it's a lot with freed slaves who go and get educated and make it a point to be as possible, to have as large and expansive a vocabulary as they possibly can. When they write, they write with an upper class audience. The upper class is the only one that's going to be able to read this book anyway, because literacy is not widespread, although more widespread in America than in other countries. But he wants to show people, again, not only the humanity of Africans, but the potential of Africans, that they can learn, they can become educated as well if given the opportunity, as he's had. So again, he's chained in with his fellow Africans, and finds out that some of the Africans who had taken him have come with him on board and are actually being paid, right? So again, there's African complicity in the slave trade. They brought him some spirituous liquor in a wine glass, which I think is interesting, and I wonder about that. What they might have been doing is not drugging the slaves, but kind of getting them liquored up a little bit so that they kind of dulls their pain, maybe lessens the screams that I'm sure they were doing. We skip way ahead through the Middle Passage, huge sugar colony in the West Indies, and again they're going to be sold, right? And he's worried once again about being eaten. They put us in separate parcels. They examine us. They make us jump, right? Part of this is about the sale, is about the marketing of the slave. I mean, here they've come through this terrible journey. Many have gotten sick. Many have died, been thrown overboard. The ones who make it, though, now have to be sold. So before they go to market, the slave traders, they oil them up, feed them a bit better the last few days of the voyage. They try to get them some exercise so they look healthy, right? Because the slave purchasers, when they are looking at these folks, they're worried, right? They're worried about slaves who are going to be sick and unhealthy, right? Because not out of any genuine concern, but they don't want to buy a sick slave who's going to go back home and die, right? And then they've lost hundreds of dollars, on this slave. So they're made to jump about. They're examined. They would look in their gums. They would do all kinds of horrible things with women as you would expect a cow or a horse that you were planning to buy. Again, these people, the slaves were not seen as people; they were seen as product, as an investment. There came to us Africans of all languages. Again, the sheer diversity of Africa is hard to comprehend. I mean, we're so accustomed to just lumping Africa together as one place. Some people have called it a country, right? It's not a country; it's a continent with tremendous diversity, and you've got Africans here from all different parts of the continent thrown together. We were all pent up together like so many sheep in a fold, without regard to sex or age. As every object was new to me, everything I saw filled me with surprise. Right? The brick houses, the fact that houses are built up on stories, people on horseback. These are all unprecedented things in his mind. And then he describes the slave purchasing day, right? They beat the drum and buyers rush in. They're all looking, to make the choice of that parcel they like best. A parcel, right? He chooses his words carefully, right? A parcel is a thing. It's a package. That's how the slave purchasers looked at the slaves. These are parcels. These are not human beings. The noise and the clamor with which this is attended, and the eagerness visible in the countenances of the buyers, serve not a little to increase the apprehensions of a terrified, right? I mean, this is a frightening experience. You got noise, people yelling, people pushing and shoving, people prodding you, people, very eager to buy you. I mean, it's going to freak people out, especially if you're a young boy, as he was at the time. And then the rest of this paragraph, he's going to shift in time from 11-year-old boy explaining the experiences I went through when I was younger to educated abolitionist speaking to you as a Christian, as a fellow Christian, to try to get you to end slavery. Right? He says, I remember in the vessel in which I was brought over in the men's apartment, there were several brothers who in the sail were different lots, and it was very moving on this occasion to see and hear their cries at parting. Right? He's talking about family up, and he sees some brothers split up, but mothers were separated, wives and husbands were separated. Right? If a man wants to buy one slave and he thinks this particular slave is the best one, he's going to buy that, even if that means that slave is going to be separated from his wife, or kids, whatever. And this was one of the things that really horrified abolitionists more than anything else. I mean, this is why the slave trade, even above and beyond slavery itself, this is why the slave trade became the focus of the abolitionist movement, because here they felt was an unmitigated evil. No one could be in favor of what goes on in the slave trade. No one could be in favor of families, right? And Equiano is going to press this point. Oh, ye nominal Christians, right? That's a powerful line, right? Nominal Christians. You basically so-called, right? You call yourself in name, nominal, in name only. You so-called Christians. Might not an African ask you, you learned you this from your God? Learned you this from your God? Did God teach you to treat people this way? Is this what God has taught you? Who says unto you, do unto all men as you would men should do unto you? Who teaches? That's Testament, right? That's Jesus. Equiano knows Jesus, right? He's a converted Christian, so he's going to use the Bible to try to convince other Christians of the immorality, of the unchristianness of slavery, right? So he's trying to make the most powerful argument he can, and so he is going right in on his Christian readers and say, God did not teach you this. God taught us to treat us with respect and treat us as we would wish to be treated. That is not the way. That is not what's happening with the slave trade. Is it not enough that we are torn from our country and friends to toward luxury and gain? Must every sacrifice to your avarice? Again, avarice. That's not the word of an uneducated African buffoon, right? This is an educated person. He's going to use the best of the English language to make his case to you, English readers, right? He's saying it's bad enough that you tore us away from our country. Now you're going to tear families apart too. That's all we've got left, right? For some of us who managed to make it across with brothers or kin of some kind. Are the dearest friends and relations now rendered more dear by their separation from their kindred, still to be parted from each other, and thus prevented from cheering the gloom of slavery with the feeling their sufferings and sorrows? Right? He's really pulling at the heartstrings here. He's saying, okay, yeah, sure, you're so greedy and lustful that you enslave us, but can't we have even just this one thing where we can at least share the gloom of slavery with our friends and family? You're going to take that away from us too? Why are parents to lose their children, brothers their sisters, or husbands their wives? Surely this is a new refinement in cruelty, which, while it has no advantage to atone for it, thus aggravates distress and adds fresh horrors even to the wretchedness of slavery. Right? And again, this, if the slave trade, separating families, was the worst aspect of the slave, Equiano are just going to bore down. They're just going to pound away time and time again with pamphlets, with books, with paintings, with stories. This becomes the heart of Uncle Tom's Cabin, decades later. In the 1850s, right? This idea that slavery rips families apart. How can any Christian support this institution, right? So this, again, this is Olaudah Equiano, an early abolitionist, making a very against slavery, for the abolition of slavery, even before 1800, in the late 1780s, shortly after the American Revolution. So the last question that I want you to answer for this week, so you had 4 on the previous video, and now the 5th one is to describe what happens to Olaudah Equiano, and what do you think of this excerpt? What do you think of this experience that you just read about? So that's question number 5, and we'll talk more about it in class.